Okay, let's just do a quick review. 1 Thessalonians. I don't want you to miss the significance of this book. This book is actually a fascinating read. You have to understand. Listen. Okay, Paul's first letter went to the churches in Galatia, and that's where we get the book Galatians. And it was written to correct primarily doctrinal error. I mean, who wants to do that? But this book is written to a church that really had a fascination with God. They found God all satisfying. They committed their lives to Christ, and they were living it. Oh, Paul's loving this letter. Now, he had started this church, but had to eventually leave town due to the persecution. But the church is doing really well. And he is impressed that despite the persecution, they're still sharing their faith. They're loving each other. I mean, this is just like, this is the model church. So this is a good book. Now, in this book, he covers a lot of teaching. Now, you have to understand. You read this letter, you've got to read between the lines at times, because you have to understand, Paul has a relationship with his church. He's already taught them a lot, so when he mentions something, they know what he's talking about. We'll stop and drill down on a particular word or phrase because that's just what we have to do to clarify. But this book, it just covers a spectrum of teaching. Think about it. He talks about the gospel. This is like the very beginning. This is what it means to be a believer, to admit that you're a sinner, then put your faith in Jesus Christ, commit your life to Him, and all that. So that's the gospel. Then it goes all the way through. He talks about the Holy Spirit. He talks about God. You got all this stuff going on. And then he talks about the wrath of God. You talk about a spectrum of subjects. And we'll touch on all of them. He gets into issues of morality and it's a lot of stuff, just a lot. So it's really a great book. And listen, if this was the only book you ever read in the Bible, if you could master this book, you could be a model Christian. In fact, you know what I would do? And I know we got my messages and all that. And, I was thinking, okay, by the time we're done, I'll probably have said 60,000 words. But here's what you do. You could do this on your own. Take every chapter and write down 10 practical, personal things that you want to do. For instance, first chapter, he talks about the Holy Spirit working in his life. You know what? That could be one. You would just ask for the Spirit of God to work in your life. All right? There's one. Love. He's like, Paul's amazed that these people love each other so much. They have a lot of different backgrounds. All right? So there's a lot of things. And, of course, we're in chapter 2 now. But that right there would just be an incredible. This book is just an incredible book. The sad part is, I'll probably never teach this book again. We'll move on to other books. And won't be time to come back to it. But anyway, so it's a great book. So let's go back now. We're in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And we're going to look at verses 7 to 12. Now, when you go to the Bible, it's not all about doctrine, so to speak. It is, because you got to flesh it out. But this passage in particular is what you might call soft skills, people skills. All right? So that's what we're looking at today. In fact, Paul uses the metaphor. He uses two, moms and dads. Hence the title of the message, Tough and Tender. Okay? Now, in my home, my dad, when growing up, was the tough one. And it's funny. I have watched my dad over the years, and he hasn't done a 180, but he's done about a 115. You know what I mean? He's not all the way, But there was a time when there was not Well, I hate to say it, but I wouldn't say there wasn't an ounce of tenderness, but you didn't see it. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't know, what your backgrounds are. And my dad was he was just tough as nails, hardcore, and so on. So then we're down at the ACC tournament, okay? So this is on Saturday night. So the game ends, I don't know what time we got back to the room, 11:30, I don't know. So we're in the truck coming back, Dad, me, and Dylan, and then the guy that I took with me. And he's like, wow, I didn't get to tell Carol goodbye. I need to go up to your room. And I knew she'd still be up. So he says, I need to go tell her bye. And I'm thinking, wow, probably 20 years ago, he wouldn't have said that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying But all of us, hopefully, are getting better at a balance. Because there are times you got to be tough. Sometimes you got to be tender. Oh, I thought yesterday or Friday, for the Duke fan, the guy, the star on Duke's team, decides he's going to showboat a little bit. So he's all by himself. He goes down the court and he's going to do a backwards dunk. He missed it, okay? And I mean, Krzyzewski, Coach K, just about became unglued. There was a time to get tough. Are you see what I'm saying? Oh, he calls timeout and takes him out of the game. What I'm saying is there's times to be tough. Now, if it's a game-winning shot and you miss it, that's the time to be tender. You know what I'm saying? So it's this balance of being tough and tender. All right? So that's where we're at today. Boy, but as parents, just like the Apostle Paul, you're trying to pass on values. You're trying to raise kids who will be able to handle whatever life throws at them. You want them to resist negative attitudes and influences and then be responsible. Well, last week we talked about character, living from the inside out, because character does matter. I heard a guy say this week, and it's probably true. You just think in your own life. He said if somebody lacks character, they may be able to hide it for 10, maybe 15 years. I found that to be true. I've tried to go back and look at people. And think, after I knew them 10 years, the truth came out. And they had lived a lie before me for 10 years or 12 years or whatever. And then when the guy says even up to 15, because some of you are thinking, there's this person and their character is shady and it bothers you that nobody knows. Because listen, we all have these people. So they move on to greener pastures, right? With their bad character. And you know what? 10 years, 15 maybe, it's all going to come out again. That's just the way. Because see, you can't help but live from the inside out. Scary, isn't it? See, some people think they're going through life and they're hiding it. Got it all under covers. I could sit here and tell you story after story after story. I could tell you a story about somebody I knew. He had actually killed somebody. Wow. And I think it was probably like 15 years before it came. I mean, it's incredible. Of course, nowadays you got Google. You just can search people. But, wow. Anyway. All right. So, let's start at the beginning, and this is where we're going. 1 Thessalonians 2:12. Paul, he writes verses 7, gets into verse 12, and here's his purpose statement. To walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. So we want to walk worthy of our calling. It's just like the Great Commission. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing and teaching people to observe and obey. Fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Obedient followers. Once again, if this was the only book you had, this would be pretty good. All right? And you would be well served. And we could probably all do a little better on people skills. All right? But We're believers, Christ followers. You have to live a particular way to be worthy. Speaking of basketball, you may not have been, but since I was speaking of it, or any ball player, they'll get scholarships. But do you know, if you get a scholarship, you have to live up to a certain standard or you lose your scholarship. Maybe even get kicked out of school. So this is not an unusual thing that we're to walk worthy. If you think about it, we got a scholarship, didn't we? We got a free ride to heaven. You think about that. We don't have to pay for our sins. Jesus did. All paid for. All expenses paid. That's a good deal. Wouldn't you think we'd want to walk worthy? Anyway. Well, parenting, just like coaching to some extent. Tough and tender. Well, as a parent, I'm sure I don't know if my kids have never accused me of being too tough. I was always kind of soft. Hate to admit that, but I think they would probably agree with me. I probably could have been tougher. It's a hard balance. I mean, as a parent, you're always going to battle that. Okay? Tough and tender. But Paul does give us some pretty good insight here, so let's see what we got here. But I know this, Paul knew that in order to make a difference, he had to be different. Be different. Last week was his character, today's his conduct. Last week was his heart. Now let's look at some of his habits. Okay, listen. Your character is under divine scrutiny because you can't hide your character from God. Once again, you can hide it from others for maybe 10 or 15 years. But you know, you can't hide your behaviors. Everybody sees them. Everybody sees them. So here we go. Paul says, now this really strikes me. Now, you understand, Paul used to be like a terrorist. He would actually capture Christians and put them to death. I mean, it's what happens today. Believers are losing their lives today by the thousands. Not here in this country, but in other places they are. Paul is radically converted, and here's what he says. But we were gentle. Gentle. That is not Paul gentle? Wow. That really blows me away. Now, then he says this, being affectionately desired. Now he puts the word affection. Now, come on. As a guy, that just doesn't sound right. This is almost like, whoa, I don't know. This is getting a little too uncomfortable here. And we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves. Because you had become very, another word, dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil while we proclaim to you the gospel. Your witnesses, God also, how holy, righteous, and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Now, the first word is but. That is a very strong word to contrast Paul from the false teachers and critics that we talked about in previous weeks. Paul was different. But really, his people skills are really parenting principles. I mean, you can take this as a parent. You can take them to work. You can take them wherever you want to go. But these are just people skills. And Paul was both tough and tender. He mentions 4 in particular. The church noticed, and Paul was proud of these skills. He was. Now, I know this as a parent, you'll always wish you did something different. I wish I had understood the 5 languages of love earlier in life, but I didn't. I use them all the time now, and I talk about them with people all the time because they're just so huge. I wish I'd been more sensitive at times. Listen, I'm not the most sensitive person at times, okay? Just not. Uh, I wish I'd taken more time to listen. Anybody like me? You have a hard time sitting and listening, huh? So, I don't know. But you know what? People are watching, and this is hard. Your kids are watching. Dad didn't have time to listen. I'm just saying, parenting skills are tough. But you know what? If people are going to talk about you, this is what you want them to say right here. 4 things. All right? Paul says, tender love and once again, we were gentle among you, and get this, like a nursing mother. Now you think about a nursing mother. We had 5 kids. Carol nursed all 5 for about a year, and you know what? It takes a lot of time. And you know, then you get on a schedule, and then that's it. You know, every 3 hours or whatever it was, but a lot of time. But the truth is, we live in a cruel world. I was walking down some hallways here, and I saw a sign, how to stop bullying. Okay, listen. When I grew up, we were cruel too, okay? We were. We were crueler than we should have been. But I guess it's just gotten to a breaking point. And you just walk into any school, and they got all these values on the wall, you know, and then they're trying to combat bullying. It's just, gentle's not an easy word to teach. And it's a soft word, but it's necessary. Even for guys to be gentle. Wow. Well, I've already said we're in the middle of the high point of basketball season, and there will be missed shots at the end of the game. There will be stupid mistakes at the end of the game, and there's going to be some heartbreaking losses, and there's going to be a lot of tears. And that's when the coach, the parent, you got to be gentle. Just the way it is. Sensitive. Everybody loses. Everybody suffers a loss at some point. You know? And there will be times you'll watch a game, you're like, I wish that was the only thing I lost, was my team lost. You really had no skin in the game, so to speak. You're just a fan. But that gentleness is tough. Listen, I grew up, and here's what it was, and we just said, suck it up. I mean, that was it. There was no sympathy. There was very little gentleness. You know what I'm saying? Listen, when I was in high school, all right, I played baseball, because I could do that. I could play that all right. But I went out for the JV basketball team, okay, because I had 2 coaches, okay. Now the one coach, my baseball coach, little weak on the soft skills. Are you with me? Not a gentle guy. He was also the football coach and all that. So, and the basketball coach was he was much more personable, all right, and so on. So. Anyway, so I played baseball. Okay, so in baseball, my sophomore year, I got hit in the head in spring practice in March. All right, and I had a concussion. Actually, okay, so just so you know, I wasn't. Okay, let me explain how it happened. I'm a left-handed batter. The guy pitching was left-handed. All right. He throws a curveball. I could see. You're like, well, what you just stand there like a dummy? No, that's not totally it. The curveball just didn't break. I could see the spin, you know. Well, I hung in there. It never spun. Well, at the last second, I ducked, and that was before they made the helmets. They only went like this, you know what I mean? Now they have them. And if I'd had the new helmets on, I would never had a concussion. Anyway, so the ball hit my head. When I turned around, hit me right there. It went over the third baseman's head, all right? The coach was at third base as the coach, and he's hollering for me to get up and run. He thought I done hit the ball. He wasn't paying attention to the game. He thought I swung, hit the ball, and went out in left field. All right? Well, okay, I'm on the ground. I mean, this was the most pain I've ever had in my life. Okay. He didn't care. He comes over, looks at me, and says, well, you probably ought to call your mom. So I don't know how I got in there. Anyway, I got in the locker room, called Mom. Mom comes to get me, takes me. I don't think she just took me to the emergency room. Anyway, long story short, not that he didn't. Anyway, okay, you got the story there. Okay, so basketball. Go out ninth grade for the JV basketball team, and I still remember it because it was not a bad experience for me at all. I love basketball, but the only thing I can bring to the game is instinctiveness and speed. That's it. I don't have a great shot. I'm not a great ball handler. I have no height. Okay. So I go out for the team, and I know I'm not getting a jersey because here's guys can tell. We had 12 jerseys. I knew that. I was the 13th best guy out there, and I knew that. So it came time for the coach to make the final call. So he calls me in, and I could tell it bothered him. He was upset that he had to cut me. I wasn't upset at all. I already knew where I fit in, okay? But here was a guy, he was sensitive that he had to cut me. Which coach do you think I gravitated more to? And eventually my basketball coach became my baseball coach. The guy who had the better soft skills, right? The guy who could be gentle, sensitive. Anyway, all I know is this. All of us are in the people business. All of us. Okay? So, let's move on to number 2. And here's the deal. You'll be more likable. I've already said that. Which coach did I like the most? The second one. It's just the way it is. See? All right. Second one. Hard work. Paul said, for you remember, now once again, they saw all this. He wasn't blowing smoke. You remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We work night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel. Well, Paul wasn't lazy, and they knew it. And, I've always said I struggle a little bit. I struggle with a balance here because my dad never did anything but work. That was it. And then when I went to Kenya to work with a missionary for 6 months, he was the second hardest working guy I'd ever been around. And we were up at 5:30 every morning, and we went till dark every day, whether it was physically building churches or holding evangelistic stuff, meetings and stuff, and so on. So I struggle with a balance. I mean, when do you say that's enough work and it's time to take a break and relax? So I struggle with that. But I also know that laziness, people struggle with that. I hate to tell you this, but it got to the point where when I worked with Dad, we'd hire people from the church. If they needed a job, they would ask if we needed any help. And I'm just okay, not everybody who needs a job should seek out to become an iron worker, because you have to climb up high and you have to walk on skinny pieces of steel. There aren't many people that can do that. There just isn't. Very small percentage of people. That's really not the type of job you should be looking for. But boy, we would hire guys, and boy, they were just, some of them were lazy. And they made Jesus look bad. And Dad finally told me, he said, look, we're not hiring anymore from church. But we did hire one guy, Gary Maxwell. And the guys always spoke highly of him. Even after he moved on and all that, guys would still say, yeah, that one guy from your church, Gary, he was good. He was a hard worker. See, people notice. People notice those things. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. Once again, he knows your character. He's watching. Not for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the inheritance as your reward, for you're serving the Lord Christ. How you work matters. Hey, Jesus talked about 2 guys who built houses. Remember that? One guy, he cut corners. He built his house on the sand. The other guys built his house on the rock. See, one guy cut corners. And you know what Jesus said? I noticed. You know, it just kills me. And I ride by and, okay, I'm just not a fan of houses that are built with exterior walls with 2x4s. Okay? But builders use 2x4s all the time because they're cheaper than 2x6s. All right? I'm just saying. 2x6s are a lot stronger, and I'm not going to get into all that. And I always just feel like guys cutting corners. And I know of a guy around here, you know what he used to do when he built a house? He didn't put gutters on. And you know what? He got the same price. And he cut a corner so he could fatten his pocket. I'm just not... Come on, if you have a house, you need a gutter. Okay? Anyway. People notice. Now, I will say this. Some people notice. Because some people buy a house and they don't think anything of it until they've been in it for a year or two. And they're like, wow, my house, yeah, that didn't, you know, then it all comes out anyway. You know, it's interesting. Look, I'm embarrassed sometimes when I read about these guys. Okay, in the early 1800s, there was a theologian by the name of Charles Hodge. I don't expect you to know the name. He was a seminary professor at Princeton, all right? Wrote a 3-volume set. He wrote commentaries. Listen, he had a leg issue in his 30s. It got so painful. You know what he had to do? He would actually have the guys over to his house and he would teach seminary classes laying on his couch. He wrote a commentary on the book of Romans laying on his back on a couch. You starting to feel like a whip about right now? I am. And then he wrote his 3-volume theology on a couch with extreme pain. I'm like, wow, that's a whole nother definition. It's a hard work. I think, you know, what would keep us? Doesn't take much to keep us from working. All right. I need to press on. Number 3, a wholesome lifestyle. You are witnesses. Once again, Paul's life was an open book before these people. Let me just throw this out real quick. I think I'll bring it out here in this text right here. How holy, righteous, and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. All right. Man, you just can't beat transparency, authenticity, and integrity. Not everybody's who they are. A lot of people are different in private than they are in public. I share things in here. I share things on my blog post, you know. I share pretty much everything, probably too much at times, but, you know, hard to keep the balance. But, you know, I also have kids, and I've said this numerous times. I have kids. They listen to my messages. Rachel listens to them, and she lives in Ohio. All right? I mean, she just... So, they know if I'm telling you how it is. All right? So, it keeps me straight. But I love sports. I think that's one reason I love sports. You know what I know about sports? You can't fake it on the field or on the court. I know a guy years ago, and this guy, he was blowing smoke. We didn't know. And he said, yeah, he had fought in Vietnam and all this, and he's a few years older than me. And you know, a new guy, you believe him, right? I mean, right? You just believe him. Well, eventually it came out like it always does. He'd never been to Vietnam. I mean, you know, this guy just blowing smoke. But, you know, it's just amazing. But, boy, you put them on the ball field, and they're like, oh, yeah, I was top basketball scorer in my high school. So one day you're out there throwing basketball. Hey, let me see your shot. And he goes to dribble, and then he tries the other hand. Yeah, right. Okay. Got that figured out already. Because you can't fake it on the court. Man. Anyway. Now, I want you to keep in mind, and I haven't brought this out before, Paul was a Jewish boy. And for Jewish boys, their dad would teach them a trade. All right? And Paul's dad taught him the trade of tent making. All right? So you would make tents. for people. And some people, if they had houses, they would maybe have 2 compartments of a tent, maybe 3. That's what Paul would do for a living at times. Now, when he was in Thessalonica, he received financial support from the church at Philippi, and he would work as a tent maker also at this particular time. He's only going to be there for a little while, so he worked as a tent maker. Now, here's what I know about construction workers. I don't trust a lot of them, okay? I just don't. I mean, I've already alluded to some. I mean, they're not thinking about you. Some of them are. I'm not going to throw them all under the bus. We've got some guys in here do construction work, but I'm telling you, you've had people come over to your house, haven't you? Yeah. I've hired people, and they tried to cut corners and try to take me for extra money, and wow. Paul was honest. And you know what? Somebody said, yeah, Paul, he did a tent for me. I'll tell you what, you can trust Paul. I mean, hey, he was just living it out. Living it out. All right? Psalm 17:3. Let me give you 3 thoughts. You've tried my heart. You have visited me by night. You have tested me. And you will find nothing. Okay, just notice those 3 verbs real quick. Tried. That's a divine examination. Nothing escapes God. I like the word visited. It has the idea of when you're laying down at night. And I always think of the well-known Zig Ziglar phrase. Well, you may not know it. And here's what he would say. He talked about his marriage. And he would say, I just knew that by the end of the day, I wanted to lay down with a clean conscience. Now, when you're laying down in your bed at night, the lights have gone out, and you're still awake, anything wearing on you? You cut a corner during the day, weren't truthful, weren't honest. Boy, it all comes out at nighttime, doesn't it? See? Can you lay there feeling pretty good? Because you know what? You lived it that day. And then the word tested. Intense scrutiny. I often wonder how a dishonest believer prays. I really do. I've thought about that. Well, I got to get on to number 4. Enthusiastic affirmation. This is for the dads. For you know how, like a father with his children, he gives us three more verbs here, all right? So let's just drill down on these real quick. Okay, we got the verb exhorted. Okay, this is really how it goes, okay? It's like a coach. Or it's similar, or even a parent. It's before the game, you come alongside your child and you give them direction and guidance and you challenge them and all that. All right, now get in there and get ahead or whatever the sport is. Well, then they run into trouble. They're in a slump. They can't hit a basket. 0 for 7. Okay, now it's time for encouragement. Are you with me? This is comfort. When Lazarus died, friends of the family came, and it said they came and encouraged. They spoke tenderly to Mary and Martha. So that's what you do. You don't say, son, that pitch was high. Why'd you swing at that? That's probably not the best time to say that. Are you with me? You got to be a little softer, a little more tender at that moment. All right? You don't kick them when they're down. The 3rd verb is charge. You speak tenderly, but you're not done. Now, as a father, you implore, you urgently plead. Hey, that's okay. That was last time. Now, let's get back in the game. Keep your eye on the ball, the strike zone, and you can get a hit. Come on, you got it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Now you're imploring, you're charging, and all that. And it's just like our everyday theology. Paul's basically saying, just live like a believer. Every day. That's the charge. That's the charge. And you think about it, it's all three. When Paul planted this church, I mean, he's coming in and he's exhorting them from the get-go and all that, giving them instruction, teaching the scriptures. And they had a lot of persecution to fight. Now it's time to be tender and comfort them. And then eventually they'll know, but you got to stay in the game, because you know what? It's too easy to quit. It's too easy. It's too easy. We've made it too easy to quit in our culture. Way too easy. Now it's time to challenge, get back in the game. Well, that's the challenge, to be tough and tender, is it not? And this week, a little too tough, then you swing it back, and then you're a little too tender. And you're always going like this, trying to hit the balance. And I just find it amazing that Paul could say, you know what? I did. I hit the balance. I got in your face when I needed to, but I was tender when I needed to be. And that means that you and I can both be tough and tender. Let's stand for prayer, shall we?